This is my collection of my custom designed 3D printed VPET deck boxes. Based closely on the look of an original VPET, the design also includes a window so you can easily identify what deck is in the box while showcasing a favorite card or alt art from the deck. I originally used and was inspired by Black Liquor Studios' VPET deck box, but had a few issues with the design and ultimately felt like I could design a better deck box. Well, after many months and a lot of tweaking, the deck box is finally at the point where I'm comfortable releasing it to the public. In the description, you'll find links to the files on both Printables and MakerWorld. The files include 3 sets of 3MF files, 1 set of files that have been configured in Prusa Slicer, 1 set of files that have been configured in Orca Slicer, and a 3rd set of raw 3MF files if you want to use Kira or any other slicer. I've also included the original Fusion 360 and step files in case you want to modify the design in some way. These deck boxes were designed prioritizing aesthetics over printability, making them a bit tricky to print, though it's nothing a well-tuned printer can't handle. Even though only these 2 deck boxes are of the latest revision, the one being shared, in this video I'll be swapping between various deck boxes to show off certain aspects, as the overall design has remained largely the same. If you want to skip ahead to the actual assembly, you can use the chapters and timestamps in the description. Otherwise, let's go over the parts for this build. Starting with the 3D printed parts, the box consists of the bottom, the top, aka the lid, and insert. We also have the trim pieces here, which consists of the cage, 2 screw-in buttons, a 3rd taller button, which doubles as a memory counter, and the reset button. The trim pieces are designed to be removable, allowing you to easily swap between different colors. Lastly, we have 2 5x1mm disc magnets that allow the memory counter to be easily removed from the insert piece, and a window piece measuring 60 by 58.15mm cut out of a 1/8 inch thick piece of acrylic, though there are alternatives for this that I'll go over later. The deck box comes in 2 sizes at the moment, one for single sleeve decks, and one for decks that use standard inner sleeves, with a 3rd variant for decks using outer sleeves on the way. The difference between the single and double sleeve deck boxes comes down to the height of the bottom piece, with one being 43.5mm tall and the other being 49mm tall. Both are designed to hold a single-sleeved egg deck of up to 5 eggs and a 50-card main deck. You should also be able to cram 2 memory counters in without too many issues, especially if you're only running 4 eggs. Looking at the pieces themselves, both the bottom and lid were printed face down on a textured PEI plate, which gives the bricks a great texture. With that being said, I find a smooth PEI plate gives better bed adhesion, which can be an issue. The brick pattern results in a lower surface area, which can lead to slight warping on the bottom piece. Both pieces are also susceptible to individual bricks coming loose during the first few layers of printing. Specifically, if your bed isn't well leveled, the bricks can get caught on the nozzle or just come loose from the plate, causing the print to fail. Once you have gotten past the first few layers and the bridge layer has printed successfully, you shouldn't need to worry about this anymore. A brim can be used to alleviate these issues, but it can be a bit arduous to remove and negatively affects the look of the finished print. The insert piece is what most of the trim piece is attached to, and is called such as it's inserted into the top of the lid and held in place thanks to the ridges on either side. When inserted, the insert is also slightly raised compared to the top of the lid, creating a lip that makes it harder for the top card of the deck to get caught in between the bottom piece and the lid. There are 2 versions of the insert piece, as well as the memory counter, which change how the magnets that hold the 2 together are secured. The first version has the embedded magnets, requiring you to insert the magnets into the pieces mid-print. If you are worried about the strength of your magnets, however, I would recommend using the second version, which has cutouts allowing you to glue the magnets into the parts after printing. Though this is more tedious, having the magnets physically touching means that the memory counter is less likely to fall off the deck box unintentionally. Moving on to the other trim pieces, they are also designed to be removed and swapped, though with a little more effort. The reset button is simply press fit and held in place with friction, while the cage is held in place by tabs on both the lid and insert pieces. These tabs have a bit of flex, allowing them to keep the cage held securely, but still be replaceable. To make removing both of these pieces easier, there are holes in the bottom of the insert piece so that the reset button can be poked out, and so that the tab can be flexed out of the way with a flathead screwdriver, releasing the cage. Lastly, the screw-on buttons and insert piece are threaded so that buttons can be screwed on or off without much effort. The final piece is the window, which is a laser cut piece of acrylic, aka plexiglass. If you have or have access to a laser cutter, I've also included the window.dxf file I used to cut my own. The dimensions of the DXF file are exactly 60 by 58.15 millimeters, with the idea that you can get the fitment tolerances from the curve of the laser. As a tangent, this piece should probably have just been a 60mm square, and I blame iterative design for me having gotten a bunch of windows cut before realizing how close to a square the piece had actually gotten. Back on topic, while laser cutting the window out of acrylic is the easiest and quickest method, as I mentioned earlier, there are other alternatives that you can use. Polycarbonate, aka Lexan, is very similar to acrylic, though it's not quite as transparent and it can't be laser cut. On the other hand, it's less prone to cracking, and therefore easier to cut using other methods. If neither of these work for you, you can always 3D print a piece of the correct size, and I've provided a printable window file to make this easier. Other than just printing a solid piece of the same base color as the box, if you still want the transparent window, there are guides online to get fairly clear looking prints from transparent filament. You could also get creative and add artwork to the piece, possibly doing a multicolor print with an AMS or MMU, or even using HueForge if you want something really crazy looking. A final alternative is simply adding a modifier in your slicer to remove the cutout from the insert piece, simplifying the design if you have no need for the window. If we go into Orca Slicer, you can see that we have the pieces for the box placed in our build plate. As mentioned earlier, the pieces are oriented so that the top of the lid and the bottom of the bottom are facing downwards. If you're using the raw 3MF files, you'll also want to add support to the lid with a cutout for the cages, in green here. This is the only area that needs support, though it looks like the tab on the insert piece here would need support. I printed it just fine without. The insert piece here is the non-embedded version. If you're printing the embedded version, I'd recommend printing it as a separate piece, as it otherwise can take some time to get to the point where the magnet needs to be inserted, but we'll get to that shortly. As for print settings, I'd recommend using the default 0.16mm layer height profile. In Prusa Slicer you can use the 0.15mm profile, with a few modifications. These settings should already be applied if you're using the pre-configured 3MF files, so you should only need to set these yourself if you're using the raw 3MF files. Other than setting the infill pattern to gyroid, I've also set the bridge infill direction to 45 degrees. Having the bridge infill direction set to 45 degrees improves the look while not really making the print any more difficult. To make sure that support material is only supporting the cage cutout on the lid, I've enabled support but set it to manual only, and then use the fill option on support painting to select the appropriate face. Lastly, I've used variable layer height on both the bottom and lid pieces, as there are curved areas on the top and bottom of the box, along with the ridge securing the two halves together, that benefit from the smaller layer height, while the rest of the box doesn't need such fine detail and can be printed at a much larger layer height to save time. Moving on to the version of the insert piece with the embedded magnet, we can slice it using the same profile we just modified. The only real modification that needs to be performed is to add a pause to the G-code at layer 12 so that the magnet can be inserted and then the printing resumed. It can take a while to get to this point when printing the top, bottom, and insert pieces all at the same time, which is why I recommend printing this piece separately. One issue I've had with this piece is that neither Prusa nor Orca Slicer can print the filament over the magnet very well. I fiddled with the settings, but both tried to print on top of the magnet separately from the rest of the top surface since it's technically an overhang. If you have any ideas on how to fix this, please let me know. Ultimately, it doesn't really matter much since we only really care about securing the magnet in place, and any filament that printed poorly can simply be scraped off from the top of the magnet. Lastly, we have the trim pieces. These can be printed at a 0.2mm layer height with no changes to the print settings being required. For aesthetic reasons, I do use random seam locations for all the buttons, as I think it looks better than having them all on one side, though that's personal preference. I also set the infill for the counter to 100% to give it a bit more weight. Other than that, you'll need to add a pause at layer 7 if you're printing the embedded magnet version of the counter, Though, like for the insert, and like for every other setting I've mentioned, this has already been added to the prepared 3MF files. Assembly is fairly straightforward. The one I have here is a single sleeve version I printed with embedded magnets. We'll start with the insert. Although it may look a bit messy, the filament on top of the magnet is flush with the rest of the face and doesn't require much cleaning. Next, we'll place the reset button into its cutout, followed by the window, removing the protective film if it's present. Next, we can remove the support material from the top piece, and insert the insert into the lid. By aligning one side and pushing down on the other until it clicks. This may require some force and can be a bit tricky, so you'll want to double check that both sides end up flush with the lid. Also, if the window is giving you some issues and keeps coming loose during this process, you may want to tape it down with some masking or painter's tape. Finally, we can screw in the two outside buttons. And attach the cage. The only thing remaining is to glue the magnets into the counter and insert pieces if you're not using the version with embedded magnets. To do so, I find I get best results by gluing a magnet into the counter first, then I use the counter to hold the second magnet in place while the glue is drying on the insert. This makes sure that the magnets are flush and physically touching when the counter is attached to the deck box, while also ensuring that the magnetic poles for the pieces are in the correct orientation. If you already have a counter and are printing another, you can use your original counter to glue a magnet into the insert first, then do the reverse and use it to glue the magnet into the new counter. And there you have it, deck box complete. With strong magnets, the counter should stay in place even during transport, and the box will even pass the Tulare Community College shake test. If you have any comments or questions, let me know and I'll be sure to answer them. Thanks. And the box will even pass the Tulare Community College shake test.